Today, I'm really honored to be joined by Munther Isaac, a pastor in Bethlehem who has gained tremendous amount of acclaim in recent months and years. His most recent book is called Christ in the Rubble: Faith, the Bible, and the Genocide in Gaza. He's an extremely busy and in-demand person, and I'm really grateful to you, Pastor Isaac, for taking this time with us.
Of course, Peter. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward for a good conversation together.
That's great. So as always, I will ask some questions, but people should please put questions in the chat, and then I will convey some of them. So I guess I would love to ask you to talk about the particular Christian message you have about what's happening in Palestine and Israel. I often think as a Jew myself that Judaism speaks in many different voices within our tradition, some of which are the voices that I find very powerful and moving. And some of those voices in Jewish texts are also difficult for me. And I'm aware that Jews sometimes use Judaism to defend human dignity, and they sometimes use Judaism to destroy human dignity. Similarly with Christianity, And so if you can talk about how you interpret Christianity in a way to center the struggle and the lives and the dignity of Palestinians.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said about Judaism, it's the same about Christianity. And in fact, many times when we encounter what some Western Christians say about Palestine, the war, everything that's happening in Gaza, I question whether we read the same Jesus, because it's a completely different and different message altogether. As such, we have to recognize the diversity, and at the same time, we have to challenge one another and not just accept diversity as the norm when the other side is justifying a genocide, or when the other side uses religious texts to promote or teach supremacy and entitlement. And so I am part of a long Christian tradition, whether in the global south or in the past in context of oppression. Today, I am part of a wider Palestinian Christian movement. I am by no means a lone voice within the Palestinian Christian community that believes in the God of justice and truth. And that challenges the Christian interpretations, mainly Western Christian interpretations, that give entitlement to a certain group of people based on an ethno-religious identity. We emphasize, for example, that God does not show favoritism. If anything, God sides with the marginalized and the oppressed. And by the way, as much as I like to speak from my own Christian tradition, a lot of the biblical texts that I rely on are actually from the Hebrew scriptures, not necessarily from the New Testament. And I hate to put it in a polemic way as if the Old Testament says this, the New Testament says that. Those who know me know how much I love and how much I enjoy teaching the Hebrew scripture, or what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. So the message we emphasize is simply God does not show favoritism. God does not, promote this. You can't promote supremacy, entitlement. And as such, when we look at the teachings of what is known as Christian Zionism, they clearly promote the concept of a racist, tribal God who has a distinct plan for a certain people group and who supports them no matter what, and supports them even if they go and displace and replace other people, ethnically cleanse Palestinians to establish a homeland for themselves, and as God is okay with that. We find that in contradiction to the message of Christianity, the message of the teachings of Jesus, and as I said, to the entire biblical teaching. When it comes to what's happening in our land, we clearly believe that the Bible has been weaponized to justify colonialism. One of the things I always argue is that religion and empire go hand in hand. Empires need religion. And in our context, colonialism was described as using theological and religious language, fulfillment of prophecy, Jews returning to their land, And so by changing the discourse, by the simple word of Jews returning to their land, which has become a very common phrase in most Christian circles in the West, that phrase in itself, you don't have to be theologically complicated or study dispensationalism, whatever other, dual covenant, all of these. Just the simple phrase, Peter, Jews returning to their land, makes me the Palestinian as the stranger, the invader, the obstacle. It is their land, not my land. So I am occupying someone else's land. And so when they return, they are entitled completely to push me out because it is their land. They are returning, whereas I am occupying someone else's land. And then you see why they say, why don't you go and live in Jordan, Egypt, the Arab countries has too. So they completely uh, attack our rootedness, our identity, our belonging, to the extent that today someone like Mike Huckabee, who's a pastor, openly says there is no such thing as Palestinian. So notice how the theological and religious discourse completely replaced or gave a different meaning to the facts on the ground. You have people looking at it purely as a theological issue rather than what it is. I believe what's happening in our land is a reality of colonialism, settler colonialism, to be precise. And I find that our role as Christians who believe in the God of justice, truth, to defend the oppressed, to speak truth, to challenge this notion of supremacy, at the same time without promoting hate. Our goal is not to revenge. That's why I belong to a tradition that completely believes in nonviolence. We call it creative resistance, the Kairos Palestine document. We definitely don't believe that Christians should be neutral. So we have a very strong stance, not necessarily based on our Palestinian identity, but based on our faith identity. We believe that God commands us to defend the oppressed. And I can give you numerous texts towards that from both testaments in which God says, I side with the oppressed. It's the mission of the church to defend the poor, the marginalized, to give clothes to the naked, and so on. So I believe this is at the core of what it means to follow Jesus. And this is what we try to articulate, whether before this war, or throughout this war, and now in our writing. And tragically, we are living in a days in which the Bible is again used to justify a genocide, which is, in my opinion, honest opinion, it's shameful. It's a stain on our Christian tradition. And as such, we're speaking out. And I'm not just writing as a Palestinian, I'm writing as a pastor. And I'm saying this is wrong for us as Christians, especially in the West, of course, to do so.
So maybe for people who are not so familiar with Christian Zionism, maybe you could just say something a little bit about the texts that Christian Zionists seize upon in their argument that this land belongs to the Jews alone and that the Jews must reconstitute themselves to bring about messianic times. And because I'm sure you're confronted with this all the time. So maybe you could just say something about what is the argument that they are making theologically, and how do you explain why it's wrong?
Yeah. I think before we address particular text, I think the problem, first of all, has to do with at least two assumptions. The first assumption is that when the Bible speaks about Israel or the Jews, it's speaking about the Israel of today. So there is this not just confusion, but the straight line that ignores history, that ignores theology, that even actually have a very simplistic understanding of Judaism, as if those who were in the times of David are the same who are today, meeting in a synagogue in Brooklyn. It dismisses completely the progression, the diversity within Judaism over the years. And then everything else is from a Christian perspective. Did the coming of Jesus affect all of that? So that tradition reads, Christian Zionists read the Bible and make a straight line from the biblical times to today. In my opinion, this is a very dangerous reading, especially when by association you make the connections between the Canaanites, the Amalekites, and everyone else. And so
So
using
the
the Bible.
Palestinians are the equivalent of the
Yes.
Canaanites and the Amalekites who needed to be forced out of the land.
And what happens to us is by design, by divine design. It's the will of God, and actually we deserve it. We're the bad people. Uh, so that association is the first thing we should challenge. Challenging it is by no means denying any link between the Jewish communities today and the Hebrew scriptures. Of course, there is link. Of course, there is continuity or intersection, whatever you want to call it. But to make an equivalent as if what God says to Abraham 4,000 years ago applies verbatim to all the Jews today is a problem. It's very problematic. It's a very naive and simplistic reading. And the second, I think, presupposition that we must challenge before we address the biblical text is that whatever is said in the Bible is actually relevant to solving the issues at hand today. It's as if we solve the issue in Palestine, what's happening today in the land, to whom does the land belong, who's entitled to the land, by referring to religious texts. We don't do this in any other context, Peter, right? We don't go to a battle between two communities somewhere else or a situation of oppression, and then we say, okay, let's go 4,000 years ago and see to whom did God promise this land. I mean, if we do this in any other context, it will be considered fundamentalist. It will be considered backward thinking. And if we are honest, if Muslims do it today, consider the